So there is a publication or brochure that you can get through the SEA's, an Event Steward's Guide. That is the one that tells you all the official stuff about what you have to have, all of the ways that you need to make sure your paperwork's in, and the official process. That's what you can find somewhere else. What we're going to talk about is how to actually get your event going to that stage and then after that stage. So to start with, I think your biggest and most important thing to do is get your idea of what it is you're actually wanting. Do you want, and particularly with the way that our restrictions are at the moment, you can't necessarily cook a meal. And if you do cook a meal, you have to do it in specific ways to make sure that it's served in COVID-friendly conditions. So get your idea, get your style. Do you want it for a particular period? Do you want it to represent something in particular? Do you want a picnic? Do you want a tournament? Do you want a full removed feast where people, as I believe Sir Oz, the big event he did, where people would move from one room to the next. So they'd move out of, they'd eat, move to the next room and have discussions and chats and court maybe, and then go back in and everything's set up ready for the next remove. You can go to that sort of level, or you can sit down in the simplest of, here's a basket of your food, take it to your table. So it's all about what it is that you actually want, what it is that you want to come across to with people. Do you have a hook for it? Is there something that's going to make people say, wow, this event is something that I really have to travel for, this is an event that I have to go to? Do you do a daytime as well as a nighttime? Do you make it a single day? Do you make it 2 days? You look at all these different ideas so that you can start to understand what it is you want, and you can start to work out what it is you need. If you're going to go for a regular sit-down feast, you have to have a hall. If you're going to have a hall or a venue to eat, how are you going to do your cooking? Are you going to cook at the hall? Are you going to pre-cook? Or are you going to have a combination of both? Okay. One thing that I haven't actually seen happening much anymore is the use of spits at feasts. To actually hire a spit, cook the beast at the venue. It becomes part of the pageantry and part of the theatre of the event. It is a bit more difficult because of COVID at the moment, but if you can include some kind that bit of pageantry into the food itself, you get people more invested into what you're doing, rather than saying, turn up, food's going to be served at 6. You can let people start to turn up earlier and participate, watch, whatever. Run a collegiate on how to do a spit roasted animal. Run a class on how to do a constructed pie. Anything like that you can add to just give that bit more flavour to the event. So there is, again, more reason for people to want to go. Any questions so far? Like anything? No?
So, what kind of feasts have you attended that you found to be interesting or thematic, or what's the? I mean, have you got some examples?
Okay. Well, it's a combination of example of themed feast, but also using a hall or a space to its best effect. There was a feast that we did in Torleon about 7 years ago now, that the hall was incredibly small. In fact, the hall was even smaller than your room in the back here. Yeah. It had a kitchen off of it as well, which was about the size of what you've got out there, so it was huge for the kitchen, but very small for the space. But it was in the middle of winter, and it was an old hall, so very drafty and everything else. So what we did was we made a whole series of banners of black and white, seven sins, no, not seven sins, it was the seven graces.
That's fine.
And we used an overhead projector to put them on and then draw them onto the fabrics, and we used those to enclose the space. And instead of having the tables down the middle, we actually put the tables around the outside and then built a display table down the middle using a couple of tall candelabras, a stand. We had branches because of the time of year. It was nice to bring the greenery in, and the whole hall it wasn't intended to be a white feast, but it ended up being a white feast. It was very nicely done. That feast we also did almost all subtleties as well. So you can chop and change your themes. The Field of the Cloth of Gold, which started as a high-end gastronomic style of feast, so that it was based on the time of the Great War of France versus England. They had the Cloth of Gold, the Fields of the Cloth of Gold, where they basically competed with each other between the two sides on how lavish the food could be and how lavish their encampment could be to compete for the titles. Even though they were fighting on the field, they were also fighting then in the kitchen and in the feasting hall. So the Field of Cloth of Gold, which is run now by Palit, is a gastronomic experience. It's not just food. It's taking examples and raising them to the highest level that you can and making them as effectively as royal as possible, so that what you're serving is a sort of piece that you could place a plate of dainties in front of your king and queen and say, this is what I have made for you. So I like feasts also. Well, we did King Salamander Feast up in Torleon quite a few years ago as well, and it was fully an outdoor feast. So everything was cooked over the open fire. We used the concrete bricks, the hollow concrete Besser bricks, and we constructed a fire pit with them. We had the open fire pit at the end for a grill across it. Then we had, for a flat grill, then we had a grate over, and then we constructed an oven, and on the other side of the oven we constructed a long spit that was 6 foot from side to side. Now we could have 3 beasts, we could spit roast 3 beasts at a time, so you could raise them to different levels or move them in and out and away from the fire, and then also bake. We baked pies and tarts and breads in the oven at the same time. It was a bloody cold night and it was incredibly windy, but all we had was a very large marquee where we again hung extra blankets and wall hangings inside of the marquee, and had all of the feasting tables, and then had all of the lights, and it was a magical experience, because there was nothing you could see when you looked around to say solid building. Everything said we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're so far away from modern civilization that it's not funny, because even in here you can still see those touches, whereas in there was nothing that you could see whatsoever. And every bit of food that was brought in had been prepared and cooked outside over that fire. So little things that you can do.
And that one there, that event also, we had 3 head chefs running.
Oh, yes.
And they all produced something in each remove. And the B&B at the time said every dish tasted completely different, because there was 3 sets of flavours going out.
Yeah. So ideas are what stops a feast from succeeding, or lack of ideas. And it's also what stops a feast from becoming a magnificent event. If you say, no, I've only got, I can't, then you're going to stop yourself straight away. But if you dream and you say, well, what if, how can we? And then turn to other people and say, what can we do? Is there a way? And especially, turn to Marjorie. Marjorie's been around for a few years in the SCA. She's seen so many different styles of feasting. She's got some ideas behind her. But just because you're a new person coming into the society doesn't mean you haven't got ideas yourself, because you've still got your own experiences. It's just using the people who've been around for a while longer helps you to survive some of the pitfalls. When you think about your event, really work hard on your venue, and do not, unless you are in a great hurry, do not use your first source. Do not go with the first place you see, because you have to make sure that it's going to be able to do everything that you want it to do. For example, if you want to do a spit roasted beast, you need to have an area outside where you're going to be able to put it. If you're going to be having a feast, for example, as Sir Oz did, with using the multiple rooms, you're going to need to have not only the multiple rooms, but you're going to need to have the multiple people to also help you to do that. So that's why the ideas are so important, because once you get a good list of your ideas and you take them out and say, well, what do we actually need to do this? How can we do it? And write all that stuff down. Then you have a chance of actually making it succeed. And the worst thing you can do is say, I'm the feastocrat, I'm the one in charge, I'm the one you listen to, and nobody else can do anything. You need hands. Lorix was talking a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying that in the process of getting an event ready, she sliced open her hand. She had to leave the event.
2004.
2004, thank you. You do not know what is going to happen in the lead up to or during an event. So documenting, recording, and keeping everything sorted, putting in a second, putting in a third, delegating. Okay? Don't try and keep it all to yourself, because while you keep it to yourself and you look really good, you don't look really good because things fall apart so quickly. Personal experience, things will fall apart, things will collapse on you. Theme, decor, same thing. Look at what it is you want. If you want to do, for example, a Viking feast, you're not going to have all sorts of lovely wall hangings and expensive things everywhere. You're going to try and make it as Viking simple as possible. Don't be afraid to say to other people, I've heard that you have, can we use it? That's one of the things about the SCA, is that it's about making the dream possible for everybody. And while making that dream possible for everybody, you involve everybody. You drag people into it, you make them part of it, whether they're kicking and screaming or coming along peacefully, doesn't matter. They're there, that's the important thing. Okay, so we're going to talk about food now. There are a number of incredibly good resources that everybody's heard of. Plain Delight, To the King's Taste, Apicius, etc., etc., etc. Lots of them. When you look at the recipes that are provided in extant sources, sometimes you have to wonder whether they're actually giving you the true recipe or whether they have given you the master's recipe. And a master's recipe can be like Apicius, where he says, put in 6 cups of cinnamon. In other words, you're going to have to work out how this recipe works, because he knows how it works. You have to now go away and test cook it and prepare it and see how it goes. So don't be afraid to find a recipe and practice a few times before you even think about putting it in. to your feast menu. Period foods depends on the period, depends on your time. If you are presenting a feast in the 1580s or 1590s in Spain, then you have a chance of being able to use tomatoes and potatoes. A chance. Prior to that, in other places, you're not really likely to be able to do it. It all depends on your time, where you are, and what image you want. You can either use a cookbook and say, that's it. I'm going to use recipes that we know existed. That's really great if you're trying to put on something that you really want to say to people, I know how to follow a recipe. I know how to research that book. If, on the other hand, you want to do what, to me, I classify it as real food from the time, is you look and you say, okay, so I can see that they use this sort of meat, and these sorts of vegetables, and these sorts of herbs and spices, and this is what I'm going to make. Okay? Create something that is yours. Create something that is based on the style of the cooking from that time. Create something that is your interpretation of the style from that time. Don't bust yourself feeling that you must only use an extant recipe. If you are choosing to be part of the Cook's Guild, use an extant recipe and your research. If you are wanting to make a centrepiece that is the talk of the town, use your recipes, use your extant documentation. But if you're wanting to feed a lot of people and you're wanting to give them something good for a good price, make your own recipes, because then you can be more flexible.
Covered it. Any questions?
So you've spoken about what makes a good feast. What makes a bad feast? Like, what are some of the feasting horror stories you've been to, and how can we avoid that?
Losing food in the kitchen happens all the time.
Oh yeah, make sure you know where you're cooking and when you're cooking, because if you turn up to an event and you're told that you've got a kitchen A, which is like a beautiful kitchen with 3 ovens and etc., and you're cooking for 150 people, and then you turn up and your kitchen's this small with 1 oven, and you're still cooking for 150 people, 1 whole remove, it does take a little bit longer.
And 2 big cooktops.
Don't work.
Aren't working.
That's
Yay.
fine.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, yes, we did do that, and
Yes.
we did do the one divestiture and investiture for B&B, and we held everybody up by 45 minutes, so the main kitchen couldn't present their food because our kitchen was too small.
And the equipment wasn't working properly. So you need, that's part of the knowing your venue. You go into the venue.
I've got an anecdote.
Yes.
We had an event once where the landlords hadn't bothered to tell us that we had, the kitchen we had said we were going to use was being used by another group at the same time. They had double booked it for us on purpose because they thought, oh, that'll be okay. We'll have the FCA using it and the other Christian group at the same time.
Oh,
We had share with another group.
yeah, no.
A kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah.
On purpose.
Oh,
We didn't know it beforehand.
Or planning before you feast.
oh yes.
Yep.
If you can't get enough food out to people,
Yeah.
and you can't get it out in reasonable time, that makes a really bad feast experience.
Yes.
People are hungry, or they reach the point where they need to go home because they've got kids, whatever, not that no one's there.
Yes.
So have a backup plan for, you know, if a dish or the remove is coming slower, have something else you can push out instead. So
Yeah.
there's always food going
Be
out.
flexible.
Yeah.
Do not say, this is the way it has to be. You can say, I'm sorry, we need to change the order. Do it. Let your herald know. The herald can let everybody else know.
Timing is really important. Starting early enough so that you don't start when the feast starts. You start well before the feast starts.
Yep.
And make sure that everything is on time. and assume that everybody's going to actually not want to eat anymore after 10 p.m. Until after midnight. Because it's that weird time from 10 p.m. to midnight where people will be lucky if they've nibbled anything.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if you've still got something hot to come out and it's 10 o'clock, you're going to waste a lot of food.
You've talked a lot about very interesting aspects and how to make things look with great theatre and that sort of stuff. For someone coming in for the first time doing a feast, is there one or a couple aspects in your opinion that they should focus on most?
Planning.
Planning, budget. Make sure you know your budget, how much you got for food and hall hire and any other bits and pieces you want to put on the tables.
And venue. Planning budget venue.
For your first feast, it has to be grand and opulent and a spectacular visual feast as well.
No.
There's a lot to be said for really good food that comes out. Even if you're sitting in,
I was going to say,
modern hall, really good food's a good place.
Exactly.
We've had some amazing potlucks too.
and having this hall here is a very big advantage. You're not having to go look for a venue.
Yeah.
You've got a venue right here.
One of the other most important things, I think, if you're doing your first feast, is to ask somebody else who has experience with doing a feast if they will accompany you for the feast. Not do the feast, but be your trainer wheels for you. They will be the ones that they can step in and say, hey, look, I see a problem here. Let's see what we can fix. Or you can say to them, I don't know what to do, what's happening? And again, step into there. And also try, when you're doing your first feast, to get people who have experience with doing feasts to assist you in the kitchen or assist you in the setup, because then you can say to them, this is my vision, do it. And they're more likely to be able to do it rather than you having to stand over and micromanage because you're learning at the same time. So, and the most important thing, do not ever be afraid to say, help, help. Okay? Always. Get yourself a good team. Don't try and do everything on your own.
Doesn't matter if it's your first feast or your 100th feast. It's the people around you, it's the people that are helping you do the feast, or people doing the feast, that makes the event.
It makes it more possible.
On the flip side of that, don't feel bad if you have to say to someone, no, I don't need your help, because they've helped you in the past and let you down.
Yeah, true.
It does get to a point where certain people just aren't good at particular things, so them helping you is actually going to make it worse for you. So don't be afraid to sort of say to someone, no, I'm right at the moment, thank you for offering. You don't need to tell them you don't want their help. Obviously, at certain points, people will stick their head in the kitchen and say, you need a hand. If everything's under control at that point, of course you can say, no, don't need a hand. Or you can say, well, can you come back later when we'll need help with the dishes? Or remind them that coming back later will be helpful as well.
And a schedule, a time frame, a plan, a rota, however you want to call it, you have something that is as close as possible to being set in stone that you can put up on the wall and say for everybody, this is what we're working towards.
Yeah, don't keep all that info in your head.
No way. And say, your first remove, your second remove, your third remove. And you can change your core team for each remove. So the first core team steps in, they get all their stuff done and out of the way, while core team 2 and 3 are working on the things for theirs. They then move up. And team 1 can either finish and go out and join the feast, or team 1 can then come over and help to get 2 and 3 moving through. You were about to ask.
No, I'm just listening. Just listening and breathing.
So,
there's another thing that's worth considering,
yes.
and that is how you actually organise your kitchen.
Yes.
And talking to somebody who has kitchen experience is really useful. You also need to have someone separate, not a cook, to clean up after,
Plancher.
clean up the rubbish, get the old packets, the old whatever's into the bin out of the way, ready for the next time round
Yep.
in the kitchen.
Just keep on top of everything.
And yeah, but even with the schedule, make sure it's able to be a little bit flexible, because if you're having court or things like that, especially a royal court, which can go on for a bit too long,
Or
or
they'll tell you at the start at a particular time and it starts 20 minutes later than that.
Mm-hmm.
with the invest when the new B&B steps out with their court and has a private court for a 20-minute course, and
It goes
an
for
hour
2
and a half
hours.
hour later they turn back up.
So having food that's easy to actually bring out, so people can nibble and kind of be
Happy.
kept happy while they're waiting for the crowd.
Yeah.
And always have extra bits,
Mhm.
extra things, because if, as you say, the feast, here's some nice biscuits we can send out, here's some little pies we can send out. Even if you have to scavenge from other removes and just pull part of something out of that, take them out and use them. Be a bit flexible on how food goes out. Now, one of the most important things that you must always remember with kitchens, when you start your event, you must know if anybody at all whatsoever has an allergy. You must know that, these days especially, and keep it in mind. And make sure that you have that information before you finalise everything. Okay?
And things like gluten intolerance, you can do what we did one feast and have all gluten-free stuff, and just nobody gets a special meal.
Just do everything gluten-free.
Everything's gluten-free. There's so many gluten-free options out there these days, but if there's vegetarians or...
Depends on what the budget can support.
It does, yes.
Yeah,
as
that's
long
true
as
too.
your budget will stretch for it, not a problem. But that's going back with the test cooking. You're making sure of what it is actually going to take to make enough for this number of people. You then portion. You must get your portioning under control. So you say each person can have a ladle. That means each person can have a ladle, and if there's any left over, they get more. Otherwise,
Not a ladle and a half with
Yeah.
one of our cooks giving out and then us going, well, actually we've still got 5 people and they're still waiting on this food and there's none left,
and
which does happen.
using little token symbols for people to say, oh look, see that token on that table, that means that person can't have, or that means that person must have. Use your visual cues as much as possible. And presentation, food presentation. Always suck up to the high table. Always.
High table always gets fed first,
Yes.
and then everybody else gets fed whenever.
Even if you're doing a buffet style, make sure you kind of factor in to serve the
Yeah.
high table and
Yeah.
then you go to the buffet or whatever.
That's it.
Yeah, generally if we're doing a buffet, we would still plate up for the high table, and then everybody else come up for their own buffet. But the high table, the food will get set out. Then the herald would present and name what everything is, and then welcome table 1, 2, 3 to go up.
Not as much an issue down here, we don't get that big feast.
Well, that's why I said 1, 2, 3, not 7, 8, 9.
In terms of looking at allergies and things like that, I tend to, when I'm looking at my food ideas to start with, automatically have in mind vegetarian, gluten-free, dairy-free.
Yep.
Yep.
It's fairly easy to do with a lot of our medieval foods as well, because you've got feast days, non-feast days, big days, non-big days as well. But as a general rule, it's best to start with that because they're fairly common these
Yeah.
days.
And generally, if anybody's got allergies, they would hopefully know to tell you beforehand. If not, as you're sending out invites or whatnot, you have on there, Tommy at least a couple of weeks beforehand so he can factor it in your meal planning.
Incorporate allergies or whatnot into the RSVP.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it's fairly common these days that when you book, you state the dietary requirements.
Because, you know, you might only have one person that's nut-free.
But they're anaphylactic.
But they're anaphylactic, so anything that gets served to them has to all be cooked in separate things, and maybe even a separate kitchen.
Not even the raw oil.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't need the old EpiPen to come out.
No.
Alright, cool. I think I would like to say thank you, both Tosti and Tim, for coming and having a talk with us about this and teaching us about these things. I will be ending the recording here, but if anyone has further questions, please feel free to talk around in a group. But for any of those listening in future on internet devices, thank you for listening, and see you at one of our feasts soon.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
Like, comment, and subscribe.
See that banner